All right, Wilson folks, this is Daniel 11, part 3. And if we do this correctly, we should crack this thing open today and be able to play with it. Not just understand it, but play with it. This is my favorite part when we get to this level. So this here is, you may remember that there are two major chiastic structures that run through Daniel 11. One of them actually runs from the beginning of Daniel 10 to the middle of chapter 12. But this one does not. The larger, more complex one goes from chapter 10 to the middle of chapter 12, and it has a lot of chiastic matches that are individual words or phrases or thoughts, like different ways that they match chiastically. This one is much simpler. It really is just power in charge of the time period mapped out chiastically. So we have before and after Rome, the beginning of chapter 11, the end of chapter 11, relative to the rise of Rome. Greece is before Rome and Babylon is after Rome, or resurrecting Rome. Then we have Rome in the middle, pagan Rome on the left, holy Rome on the right, and the sections within chapter 11 that corresponds. And we have the repetition of that, the second pagan Rome on the left, the second holy Rome on the right. And in the middle is verse 29. It's the ascension of holy Rome following the empire's collapse. That's where the war stops being horizontal to their human enemies and begins to be against the Holy Covenant itself, the vertical war. Now, last time we met, we looked at why there are two sections dedicated to pagan Rome and two sections dedicated to Holy Rome, and we discovered that the first pagan Rome section, which is verses 16 through 22, seems to focus on the Roman Empire's involvement in the land that we call Palestine today, or Israel, Judea, specifically for the purpose of leading us to the death of Christ. So all these events happen to set the stage for and allow for the death of the Messiah. Yeah. From there, it's still pagan Rome, but we notice that second section, verses 23 through 28, focuses on the city of Rome itself. And how that was the center of the empire until Constantine moved it away. And so even after the center of the empire moved away, we understood that that is focusing on the city of Rome itself up until its fall. And that differentiates those two sections, even though they're both about pagan Rome. Similarly, there is the first section of Holy Rome, which is really just the Roman Catholic Church marauding through the Middle Ages, right? Persecuting the saints and getting their doctrine wrong, and et cetera, et cetera. And then that second section, verses 36 through 39, we notice doesn't even have a real story. It almost feels like a demonic temper tantrum. And it's written differently than the entire rest of the chapter. It's written in Hebrew poetry in a way that none of the other verses are. And so it's almost like written in such a way to stand out from everybody else. And when we map all of these different periods of time into this chiastic structure, we realize that the pagan Rome section that leads to the death of Jesus and the Holy Rome section written in poetry that's like a demonic temper tantrum are counterpoints to each other, which is interesting. What do they have in common that the other pagan and Holy Rome sections do not? That's that lower down section of the two Romes are like the political movements of their respective empires. Pagan Rome in Rome itself, operating its empire all over the place, and then Holy Rome in Rome itself, doing what it does under the guise of God. But the earlier sections focus on Jesus on the one hand, and this demonic temper tantrum on the other hand. And it seems like the counterpoint, the chiastic match there is less so about the events and more so about the spirit. Right? One is the godly spirit who shows humility dying on a cross. The other is a demonic spirit that wants to rule everything in its own image. And this is the foundation we're going to build upon. We're going to turn a microscope on these two character studies of the Lord and the devil who wants to take the place of the Lord. And with that in mind, you can keep your chiastic structure handy if you want to, but we're going to go to the second handout here. It says notes on section 3 and 5. We're looking, again, relative to this chiastic structure, we're looking at section 2, which is pagan Rome leading to the death of Jesus, and section 6, Holy Rome, the demonic temper tantrum. All right, let's read our way through this. 2 sections within the thematic chiasm, by which I mean this one that centers on verse 29. The thematic chiasm stand apart from the other 4. Verses 16 through 22 end with Christ's death and are not continuous to the following verses. And remember, we discovered that on our very first time together. Also, the Prince of the Covenant, and after a league is made with him, he acts deceitfully. And we said right away that doesn't make any sense at all. So yeah, that is one section. It focuses on Jesus' death. It's not continuous after the death of Jesus. That second section, verses 36 through 39, do not follow any linear narrative at all, and are written in a literary style wholly different from the rest of the chapter, Hebrew poetry specifically. So therefore, we must consider these sections in relation to each other. When removed from the chapter, the rest of the verses form an unbroken narrative progression through history. And at this point, I think we should actually read the chapter minus those 2 sections so you can see that for yourself. So I'm starting in verse 2. That's the beginning of this whole prophecy here. The angel says, "And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. Also, the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. And at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand. But she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. But from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the forces of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt, with their princess and their precious articles of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. Also the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. However, his sons shall stir up strife, and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. And the king of the south shall be moved with rage, and go out and fight with him. With the king of the north you shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. For the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also, violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. Verse 29. Not 29. Verse 23. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully. For he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes,
Those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. While returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenants. So he shall do damage and return to his old man. So far, we've gone through Greece, transitioned to Rome, gone all the way through the pagan Roman Empire, and now we are transitioning to the vertical war. This is now Holy Rome moving on to the land. Verse 29. At the appointed time he shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved, and return in rage against the holy covenant, and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. And forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary forces. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices, and place there the abomination of desolation. Those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help. But many shall join with them by intrigue. And some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. Verse 40. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all of the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many, and he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. At that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, every one who is found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. That's a complete story, isn't it?
Yeah.
From Medo-Persia to the return of Jesus Christ. So why are these other sections thrown in there to disrupt the continuity of the narrative?
So we have to ask why. Why would God do that? What's he trying to teach us by doing that?
All right, back to your hand up.
I am on D number 4 there. Viewed this way, the way I just read through it, subtracting those two sections, viewed this way, it becomes clear that the main narrative thrust of the chapter, including all of the events listed in the above verse groupings and the various conflicts between North and South, is the progression towards Christ's second coming. These two verse groups that are exceptions to this narrative are not oriented towards Christ's return. I can just stop there. If we accept what I just said, what this is trying to help us understand is that the ancient history of the Persian kings was part of the thread that leads to the return of Jesus Christ. And we often don't think about it that way. What would events hundreds of years before Christ's first coming have anything to do with Christ's second coming? But remember, there's another chiastic structure also. And all of those early verses in Medo-Persia map chiastically to the later verses with resurrected Babylon and the end times. So, quite literally, God is showing us we can learn about the future that is still to come by first studying the past that was 1,500 or 2,500 years ago.
It's just saying it's continuation. And not only a continuation, but like a repetition. It's the same thing, just in a modern form. Right? But it's the exact same thing. It never, ever changes.
And like that's the story of
Humanity, isn't it? We like to get up on our, proud and haughty and go, we've been to the moon and we've got, AI and we can do this and this and this and this. But God looks down here and all he sees is perpetual war until he got back.
and that's it.
Maybe I'm reading chapter 11. I read it before the last time you had class. This is like, where is the skull? It's this and that, and then this, the north and the south, and then the south and the north, and then the east gets thrown in, and who are these people?
But that's how God sees the world. And God puts an end to all of our warfare with warfare. You notice that, right? Christ does not come peacefully. He comes with the whole army of his angels, slaying his enemies with the brightness of his coming. He's riding on the white horse, He's coming to wage the battle of Armageddon. He's humans. Yeah, human against sin. Yeah, not against his people, but against sin. Humans battle and battle and battle and battle for dominance and dominance, and we never actually get any dominance. Christ comes to show us how it's done. Christ wages the only war that actually counts, and he puts an end to this world and ushers in his world.
This unequal. It's like Job almost.
Okay, tell me how.
Well, because you got Job. He has his issues, and his friends coming for literally 35 chapters of the Book of Job. They got coming all going around, around and around, and around and around and around until you're trying to reach to the end of the time and shake somebody. And then God, and 37, the favorite chapters, and gosh, and so it's okay, it's my turn. Let me ask y'all some questions. Where have you been? And then when they're all done, he's all so sorry. I didn't know what I was talking about. And this just reminds me of that. We're they were in non-circles, and finally God's listen, really, I wouldn't come and accept.
Right. Clearly, you are never going to figure this out.
We're not gonna figure it out. You are
Humans. Oh my.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So and that means we're gonna drag this into the exact modern moment before we're done here today. So I don't want to do that yet, but I hope that we can look around at the modern moment as we are at war, right? There's conflict happening in Iran and these little things in Venezuela. They do something brewing in Cuba and whatnot. And we like to separate into our little groups, don't we? I am for the war for the following reasons, but I am against the war for the following reason. I support the president. I hate the president. And they'll be fight and we fight and we fight and we fight. But God says quiet down. This is all the same thing that's been happening forever, and it's not going to stop until I come back. It really takes the self-importance out of the whole thing, doesn't it? All right, so now we're on the bottom A there, right? The section 5, letter A. Verses 16 through 22 focus on events leading up to Christ's first coming and his death specifically. Verses 36 through 39 focus on Holy Rome's war against the covenant. Thus, these two sections focus on one or the other of the supernatural protagonists in this story. The first one focuses on Christ, the second on Satan. And this is logical, as these two sections are chiastic to each other within the thematic chiasm of the chapter. Each highlights an aspect of the true war that actually matters. Not with the kings who are just killing each other on the battlefield for no reason, but the war that actually matters between Christ and the devil.
So what you're saying is that literally the reason why those two disruptions are in the story is to show that the chaos that's happening on either side of the disruptions is really just a result of the two sides of the coin.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the way that those two actual players are manifesting.
That's me. It's so you were asking where's this all going? that's where it's all going. Is you just I like how you said before how this chapter is for theological nerds.
Yes. Yes, it is.
It's you don't need it to understand, but it's for people who just feel like dive a weeper.
You can easily find your way to heaven without Daniel chapter 11. Yes. Yes. But it is for those who are willing to wrestle with ideas in a way that many people are not.
For sure. All right, so we've now identified what these two chapters are and what their purpose is in the larger narrative, but we're not done yet. So, down to the bottom section. In these two sections, we see the characters of each protagonist fully revealed.
Christ's death, which sealed the new covenant between God and man, which in turn serves as the chiastic center of the linguistic chiasm stretching across chapters 10 through 12. That's the 2-page chiastic structure that I gave you the first time we were together.
And which makes possible the return of Christ, which is the ultimate narrative thrust of the prophecy. All of that is revealed with half a verse. Only. Despite being the reason that the other events are listed have any significance at all. Messiah's death appears almost anticlimactic. A humble afterthought. And also, by the way, the Prince of the Covenant. He doesn't even say what happens to the Prince of the Covenant. The Prince of the Covenant borrows a verb from someone else at the beginning of the verse.
This is further emphasized by the use of Nagid, the princely title of lesser stature. If you remember that from our first time together, years Nagid and Sar bouncing back and forth from chapter to chapter, 2 Hebrew words both translated into English as prince.
By contrast, Holy Rome's rampage against the Holy Covenant consumes the entirety of the passage of verses 36 to 39. Christ's cameo appearance in verse 22 is of exceeding humility, but Satan's allusions in those 4 verses are pompous and of exceeding arrogance. In examples, he's doing according to his own will. He's exalting and magnifying himself, speaking blasphemies, shall prosper, neither regarding the God of his fathers, exalting himself above them all. In their place he shall honor something else. He will cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain.
And that's not even the fullness of those verses. That's just a sample. So, what we're seeing here is the character of Christ and the character of Satan revealed in history. And if we have to take one takeaway from this study, it's learning the skill to see divine things happening in secular history. Do I need to say that again? This is helping us understand how even when all we can see is chaos and warfare, there is a God and a devil, both at work inside of that chaos and warfare. And if we know how to see it, we know what to look for, we can actually see these supernatural beings at work. When we get good at this, we can see this throughout the whole of history.
And we'll give you one example that we actually have studied in these groups.
Daniel chapter 7. A little horn? Remember that guy?
He has a certain period of time and he is reigning in power. What is that?
I mean,
Great. 160 days. A time times and half a time. We understand that to be years.
Yes, so 1260 years. Where does that fall in secular history?
Dark Ages.
The Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, specifically 538 AD until 1798 AD. That's right.
Well, we also realized that this was really the devil masquerading as Christ. And the devil does everything Christ does but counterfeit it. So Jesus Christ had a 3.5-year ministry on planet Earth, and then he died, and then rose again. So what we can understand, Daniel 7 is showing us, is that the entirety of the Middle Ages and Dark Ages period is the devil's counterfeit 3.5-year ministry. I think ancient history becomes a lot more fun when we're not learning about some pope or some king or some war, and instead we're learning about what God is doing, what the devil is doing, what that battle is revealing to us, and how we can see the flow of history respond to
the dominance of one or the other of those characters. History becomes alive when you look at it this way. All right, now this is going to get fun. This is a 2-pager. It says Daniel 11 narrative arcs diagram. It's a front and back, but stay on the front with me. Let's go through this in order. I realize I should have a different page that I did not print out, so that's my fault. So I'm going to do it here on the whiteboard instead. So I want to suggest that there are actually 3 independent wrong word, 3 independent stories present in Daniel chapter 11. And they all start in the same place, which is verse 2. You already read verse 2 to verse 16, starting again in 23, all the way to 35, and then picking up in 40 to the end. That is one unbroken, continuous story of warfare from Medo-Persia to the return of Jesus Christ. However, if we also start in verse 2, I'd simply take it to verse 22.
Which chapter is this?
Daniel 11. This is all Daniel 11.
Yes.
Yep. This is Medo-Persia to the death of Jesus. And that's a complete story too. The third one starts in Medo-Persia. Verse 15 skips over the death of Jesus. Pagan Rome, Holy Rome, and then through the demonic temper tantrum ending in verse 39. And that is another complete story. Unbroken. So this top one is secular events leading to the return of Jesus. Middle one is secular events leading to the death of Jesus. Third one is secular events leading to what Ellen White identifies as the French Revolution, but we don't even need to be that specific. The demonic temper tantrum that ends in verse 39. So when we break it apart that way, we realize we've got 3 separate narratives using the same words. And with that in mind, you go to that narrative arcs diagrammed page. All 3 of these narratives in the chapter begin in the same point. Verse 2, the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. The first narrative encompasses verses 2 through 22 from Medo-Persia until the death of Christ. That would be the middle one that I put on the whiteboard here that we're talking about, the smallest one. Starting in 535 BC, going to 31 AD, the death of Jesus Christ. And we get that date, 31 AD, from Daniel chapter 9. The prophecy of Daniel chapter 9 outlines that pretty clearly. The second narrative is identical with that in diagram 1 until verse 15, but then omits the segment leading to the death of Christ and instead resumes in verse 23 and continues through the conclusion of Holy Rome. Let's talk about this one down here. And that's mapped right underneath it. So they both start in 535. The death of Jesus ends in 31 AD. The demonic temper tantrum ends in 1798 AD. The final diagram is identical to this one, the one we just did, until verse 35, but then omits that demonic temper tantrum and instead resumes in verse 40 and continues until the fall of Babylon, return of Christ in verse 45, and then on into chapter 12. So if you map all 3 of these timelines together, you get this diagram on the very bottom. They all start in 535, one ends in 31 AD, another ends in 1798 AD, and that third one ends, we don't know when Christ is going to return. So a future question mark date when Jesus returns. Does this general diagram look familiar?
Yeah.
You seen something like this before? Where?
It's actually a big, the time popsy. Keep it 200 days.
The 2800 days.
70 weeks that are put up, or the, yeah.
The relationship between Daniel 8 and 9 is often diagrammed in this exact way. They both have the same starting point, but different ending points. One is significantly longer than the other. So, why don't we flip this over to the back, and we will say Daniel 11 narrative diagrams compared with the diagram of Daniel 8 and 9. So on the top there is the traditional Daniel 8 and 9 diagram, starting in 457 BC. Daniel 9 ends with the covenant going to the Gentiles, right? So it has Messiah being baptized and then Messiah being cut off, and then the end of that covenant where Stephen is stoned to death and the gospel goes to the Gentiles. That's 34 AD. And then Daniel 8, the cleansing of that sanctuary, takes us all the way to 1844. So that very last diagram is simply putting the Daniel 8 and 9 diagram on top of the 3 Daniel 11 diagrams and seeing what the result is. And look at that. They are themselves almost identical. One starts in 457 BC, the other's 535 BC. In the grand scheme of time, that's not a very big difference. 100 years out of thousands and thousands and thousands, not very big. Similarly, the smaller narrative of each one ends in 31 AD, the death of Jesus. The other's 34 AD, the gospel going to the Gentiles. Very, very close in time. And similarly, look what happens at the end. We've got 1798, the death of the little horn, 1844, the cleansing of the sanctuary, and then a mystery future date when Christ returns. But again, all relatively close in time, one to another. So Daniel 11 is really just the same structure as the Daniel 8 and 9 prophecies, and not even emphasizing different things, really. It's emphasizing like an origin point in the deep past, like a climactic point regarding the death of Jesus and the consequences thereof, and then the ultimate point, which is the death of like the false Jesus, right, the little horn and whatnot, and the cleansing of the sanctuary and the return of Jesus Christ. And I hope you see that Daniel 11 is not really all that complicated when we realize it's just a different way of saying the same thing we do in Daniel 8 and 9. But what we can do here is say, why did God give us these nearly identical patterns, but they're not actually identical? So on the very bottom, that third bullet point, the last one on the bottom of the page, it says each of the small gaps created by the differences in the diagrams represents a period of transition for God's people. The first, 535 to 457 BC, is after Babylonian captivity ended, but before the Persian decree to restore Jerusalem. The second gap, from 31 to 34 AD, is after the cross, but before the close of Jewish probation. The third one, 1798 to 1844, is after the fall of the little horn, but before the cleansing of the sanctuary in heaven. And that fourth one, from 1844 to the return of Christ, is that period of final probation, the anti-typical Day of Atonement leading to Christ's return. So what this is doing is it's showing us like that the periods of transition are of equal importance to these major events themselves. And that should make sense to you, right? You were born after 1844, but we don't know when Christ is going to return, so in theory we could all die before he returns, which means that we lived our entire lives in this transition phase. But we spent so much attention about this big event in the past and this big event in the future. Well, what about right now? And this is what I'm hoping we're seeing here is God is emphasizing right now is important too. The transition between the major events is when the church changes. And what's our job in the specific period of transition that we are in right now? You're ready. Okay. How do we get ready? We're sandwiched in between the cleansing of the sanctuary and the return of Jesus Christ. So what does getting ready look like in between those two big events?
The testimony, right?
Say
We
again.
have to pick up and get ready ourselves.
Individually get ready. I would say that is absolutely important.
But when we look at that period in between,
what happened then and how that was spoken, and look at now. We can learn lessons from that.
Absolutely.
Well, now,
Sure. All of these periods of transition have things in common. Absolutely. The church, and here's what is true for all of them. The church either gets it right or it doesn't. You know, some of the church will do what God wants them to do. They'll kind of meet that moment and then progress on to the next thing, and some will not. Some will not. We do not believe in predestination in a way that says that God has already determined whether I will meet the moment or not, and there's nothing I can do one way or the other. We don't believe that. So if we have the power to be on the right side or the wrong side, then why don't we all just choose to be on the right side? And what does that actually mean? What does that look like? Okay. Now, I'm going to now take what has been largely Frank Hardy's ideas. So that massive paper that I emailed you all, like most of everything I've said comes from Frank Hardy and his amazing work he did in the late 70s and 80s for that paper. But the Seventh-day Adventist Church also, separately, has its own kind of understanding of how to interpret Daniel 11 in its latter verses. So right now, I'm going to try to marry these two schools of thought into one. And we're going to do it in verse 29. Or at least begin there. Daniel 11, verse 29, which remember is one of the two chiastic center points, is the middle of this thematic chiastic. What does it say? Somebody read it out loud for the camel, please.
At the appointed time he shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter.
And verse 28 tells us, well, actually verse 28 and 30, so I bet you that is in itself chiastic there. But 28 and 30 tell us what has changed. What's the actual war now?
he's going against the Holy Covenant.
Holy Covenant. What is the Holy Covenant? And how can you war against it? Which is my real question.
Relying on eat
I heard the law of God,
10 commandments.
the 10 Commandments. How do you war against that?
It's the law of Allah, and how can you war against it?
Well, I'm asking directly. The prophecy says that this entity wars against the Holy Covenant. I just want to know what that looks like. Do you war against it with swords or guns?
Well, no, you don't.
By teaching contrary to after the law.
So I hear it's a spiritual war. It's contrary ideas.
Yeah.
But we all agree that it's not swords and guns and bombs, right? No. So right here in verses 28, 29, and 30, the entire prophecy shifts away from being strictly literal to now it has this extra spiritual dimension to it. But it still uses the naturalistic language. It's still warring, just like the kings of the north and south had been up to that point. But it's no longer a physical war, is it? It's a spiritual war.
It's over truth, worship, and salvation.
Papal Rome versus.
Yes, and papal Rome as a political entity did in fact have actual wars where people died, so that didn't stop, but...
Or the papacy now, I mean, what's going on now between what we know is true, the true commandments, and what they present when they change the command.
Yeah.
They cope with it.
Yep. All of this is true. What I'm trying to get at, though, is the war hasn't stopped. I think that's what you're saying, too. We're still in that same spiritual war. From Eden, yes. Thank you. From Eden, but even just from the Middle Ages, when Rome took on that spiritual identity, that war has not ended. We as Protestants stand in protest of what we see as the root of that war, but as Seventh-day Adventists specifically, we take our stand against every part of that. Like, no, Sunday is not the fulfillment of the fourth commandment. You know, we take it really seriously.
It seems like the warring against the covenant is when it goes back to chapter 7, where he is saying, where he's like God. He's putting himself in the place of God. And that's where the war is coming. Where the war is being waged. It's like, you know what? You don't worship God, worship me. And so and it goes on to the chiastic temper tantrum / Christ,
All that stuff.
all that stuff. That's where it's turning here. The war is the fact that he's putting himself in place of God, and that's where we would war against the whole covenant, where we put ourselves in place of God. Instead of putting God on the throne of our lives, we put ourselves on the throne of our lives. That's
Amen.
He's covenant. You know what I'm saying?
And so follow all of these things. Like pull these threads and destroy this sweater. Okay, like really wrap your brains around this whole ideas. That we're not talking strictly literal anymore. Even when we're looking at papal wars in the Germanic areas in the late Middle Ages, and we can say this king and this treaty and etc. What's the actual war we're looking at? War against the covenant. We can read books, we can talk about Thomas Jefferson and I don't even know all the players in the French Revolution, but we can talk about all that. We can go watch Les Miserables and read the book and see the musical and watch Russell Crowe sing all the songs in the movie and immerse ourselves in all the details of the French Revolution. But what's the real conflict? It's not the royalty getting their heads cut off with the guillotine. What's the real conflict? It's worship. Specifically. Yeah. Great shit down. So everything becomes God versus the one who wants to become God. And their interplay.
Like she said, for you.
From Eden, right. But use this language of the king of the north and the south. How are they different? Let's look at the trajectory of the king of the north. Once Rome becomes the king of the north and kills Jesus and then becomes Holy Roman, all of that is still the king of the north. So if Holy Rome is the embodiment of this spiritual king of the north, how would we describe the king of the north? Not as a political power, but what's it really doing? It's masquerading as Christ, isn't it? It's got a veneer of Jesus Christ. It's got all the songs and the hymns and the candles and the rituals and the prayers and the right words. But somehow it's teaching wrong things. It's tearing people away from the actual covenant. What I want you to understand is that does not stop. Even when Holy Rome dies, the king of the north remains.
Because the king of the north is Satan.
Because the king of the north is the veneer of Jesus with the teachings of Satan in every single form. When Babylon rises again, it will look like the Catholic Church, but we're anticipating a global, ecumenical, political, religious alliance. So, the Catholic Church is a really mild way of saying what that will be in the future.
So it's the beast.
Yes.
Revelation.
Yes, the beast of Revelation. Resurrected.
Yes, the resurrected.
Rome.
And the dragon gave him his seat and his power and degree and the image of the beast and plus.
But it's always the veneer of Jesus Christ with the teachings of the devil underneath it. That's the actual thing that never stops being true. So look around the world today. What can we see that has the veneer of Jesus Christ, but maybe speaks like the devil instead? Like everything? Flip it around to the king of the south. King of the south is opposed to the king of the north. So if you had to come up with like a one-liner to describe him, like the king of the north is the veneer of Jesus with demonic teachings underneath it, how would we describe the king of the south in a similar way? This is easiest when we look at it through that demonic temper tantrum and the French Revolution. There's a reason that is like held up as the flashpoint in human history when all of the spiritual nonsense was on the table for you to see with your own eyes.
Well, it looks like it, but it's not.
So yeah.
It looks like victory. Or king of the north. I mean, if you don't know.
the king of the north was not the victor of the French Revolution.
No, I'm not. Yeah. I was going back to the other. Okay.
The French Revolution was actually a war against God. Like, on the surface, it was against everything religious. It was anti-Catholic, it was anti-Protestant, it was anti-Christ in every single way. They would murder you simply for like pretending you had a faith. They created their own alternative gods. Young women, the accounts have several women, some say only one woman, but they would like dress up young women in like fertility outfits and parade her around the city to worship her as the goddess of reason. I'm not making this up. This is not an exaggeration. They created their own calendar with 10 days in a week because what is the one and only reason that we operate worldwide on a calendar system with a 7-day week?
Creation.
Genesis chapter 1. That is like literally the only reason that's true. And the French people knew that. So like if we're getting rid of God, then we have to get rid of the calendar that points to God. They did everything to destroy God. That's the king himself. Rampant secularism. The absence of God. It's what happens. It's all of those ideologies that happen when you take Jesus out of them. Secularism, humanism, naturalism, socialism, communism, and down all the isms of the world, right? That are like really opposed to religious thought. And so we've got these two opposing factions. On the one hand, looks like Jesus, sounds like the devil. On the other hand, doesn't look like Jesus at all and is opposed to the things of God. Which one's the good guy?
Neither.
Here, the scripture.
Neither one of those. Huh. But the players at the end of time are the kings of the north and the south.
Except for that sad news from the north.
But that's not the king of the north, is it? That's the king of the north is reacting badly to that news from the north.
That bad news is the Rock. It's that third player that we don't see.
Yes, but that third player right now is still in heaven coming. So what is the only, like, if that's still future tense and all we have is the events of Daniel's 11, where's the only safe place to be in the entire chapter of Daniel 11?
People that it was martyred. No, there's people that are being martyred in here too.
Yeah, that's not a safe place. I don't want to get...
It's not safe. I'm just
Nope.
saying that. I'm not saying it's safe. I'm just saying it's not you do a brother beater by itself.
The only safe place is to be next to the one who died instead of me. Verse 22. That's it.
The martyrs ever died too.
That's it. Those martyrs were successful because they were right there with Jesus on that cross. And that's how they sang even as a flame consumed them. That is the only safe place to be. This should change us. I mentioned the politics of it before, but really, the takeaway is anti-politics. Because I don't care how much you love Donald Trump, and I don't care how much you hate Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not Jesus. Donald Trump is not the safe place to be, and he's also not the worst place to be. The devil's the worst place to be. Jesus is the safe place to be. And that's what Daniel 11 is trying to get us to understand. The world doesn't matter. The world is just noise.
You need to stay out of politics so far as getting involved because it doesn't really
Well, yes, it doesn't really matter, but also it's all danger. It's all the king of the north or the king of the south. And where's the good guy there? There's no good guy there. Right? And so we can say, well, my side does this correct. Well, my side does this correct. Fine, but neither side getting you to heaven. Daniel 11, as far as I'm concerned, is the answer to politics in the church. And I see the widespread ignorance of Daniel 11 and the widespread swallowing of the church by politics as like a hand-in-hand symbiotic problem.
100%. I can see you.
So, therefore,
Well,
the Seventh-day Adventist Church has always taught, as an official position, that the king of the north is religionism and the king of the south is secularism. And sometimes that's explained really well and sometimes it's not. But hopefully our takeaway can be, when you look at any headlines in the world, any war, any negotiation, any king, any president, any whatever, is it the king in the north or is it the king in the south? Because it's war of the other. And you'll see the whole wide world differently. Nothing seems random when you put on those set of glasses to see everything. Nothing feels random anymore. You see, oh, this is the devil trying to get a foothold. Therefore, what is God going to do to check him? Oh, this is the devil masquerading as Jesus trying to do something. What is God going to do in response, right? We can actually kind of anticipate the future because we know who the players are and we know what their goals are and we know how it's going to end. This is so powerful. My words are probably not good enough here, but like, I really think that this is a key component in that promise of 1 John chapter 4, I think, where you have an unction from the Spirit and you know all things. Well, I'm not God. I can't tell the future. But if he has already told me the whole story, then I can see the pieces and the players moving according to that story.
Did it diminish your fear?
Amen. Diminishes your fear. Just in case the camera didn't hear that, I think that is 100% right. What is there to be afraid of?
Huh?
If the martyrs could go to their deaths singing praises to God, because when they fall, they'll be aided with a little help, according to Daniel 11, right? And they were hundreds of years away from the return of Jesus Christ. We're a lifetime away or less.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Don't say it like
It could be in my it's too far.
Right. No, I mean, I agree. I don't think it's anywhere close to a lifetime, but I'm not a prophet. So I don't, if 10 years from now we're still here, I don't want anybody to yell at me saying I gave them wrong information.
no. Come, Lord Jesus, come.
It does seem like things are moving quickly.
I like that too. And the comment was, you'll be less deceivable by the events when they happen.
Say that again, Zippo.
You'll be less deceivable. You'll be less prone to being deceived because you already know who the players are, what the controversy is, and how it's going to end.
Right.
Hallelujah. Okay. The end of October of last year, we had a week-long series of public wees that I preached. And on the Sabbath at the end of that, I had a sermon that I called, I don't remember what I called this, but it was about the last 20 years of history. You may or may not have been here for that. I don't know if you heard it. But my source material was a writing of Ellen White's taken out of Testimonies Volume 9. And the title of it is The Last Crisis. I just took us like through that writing, which was written in 1905, 10 years before she died, and suggested how it actually perfectly prophetically anticipated the last 25 years of life on planet Earth from our relative perspective, starting with the September 11th disaster in New York City, progressing through a global government business related financial meltdown.
Sorry.
It's one this night.
Testimonies for Volume 9. It's the first thing in it.
Yeah, Becky Buds made the point of the fact that the prophecy of 9/11 was on page 11.
Volume not be.
Yes. Gonna come what you have to do.
So I obviously can't prove that. That is not the Seventh-day Adventist doctrine. That is just something that the Holy Spirit smacked me over the head with a long time ago, and I've been testing it ever since to prove it wrong, and it has not yet been proven wrong. So the reason I bring it up now is because if you followed my my suggestion as to what these various writings mapped to in the real world, there's this paragraph on page 14 that says, "But who reads the warnings given by the fast-fulfilling signs of the times? What impression is made upon worldlings? What change is seen in their attitude? No more than was seen in the attitude of the inhabitants of the Noachian world," meaning the pre-flood world. "Absorbed in worldly business and pleasure, the antediluvians, quote, knew not until the flood came and took them all away. That's Matthew 24:39. They had heaven sent warnings, but they refused to listen. And today the world, utterly regardless of the warning voice of God, is hurrying on to eternal ruin. And I read that, and what that tells me is God is speaking loudly and no one's paying attention. So you may remember I suggested that like the major points of this seem to happen at the end of Sabbath years. It's like
Yeah.
a Sabbath year concluded in September of 2001 with the terror attack. Again, 7 years later when the financial meltdown happened and so on. 7 years after that would be December of 2015 when the Syrian civil war was vomiting its refugees all over the Mediterranean and Europe as the worst migration crisis since World War II, which sparked things like the Brexit vote, then took Britain out of the European Union and ultimately gave rise to Donald Trump and his political career, which he never had until he decided to fight back against this migration problem. Also at the exact same time, in 2014, there were 2 blood moons, and 2015, 2 more blood moons, and all 4 of them happened on Jewish holidays. Like literally Passover and the Feast of Tabernacles, like 2 years in a row. And in September of 2015, Pope Francis came at the American Congress's invitation and for the first time in history gave an address to the joint voting of Congress. All at the same time, at the close of a Sabbath year. And it's like God is screaming at us and nobody cares. I'll get this. If you follow my logic and agree with it, then that paragraph I just read would have its fulfillment in 2015, right? Late 2015 for that Sabbath year cycle. The very next paragraph says this: the world is stirred with the spirit of war. The prophecy of the 11th chapter of Daniel has nearly reached its complete fulfillment. Soon, the scenes of trouble spoken of in the prophecies will take place. So, when we are just reading Daniel 11 right off the page, we can define the time of the end as actually 1798. And that's the most accurate biblical reading of that. But if we start verse 40, and let's open our Bible so I'm not just saying things, we can actually know what I'm referring to. Daniel 11 verse 40 is the beginning of the last chain of events. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and many ships, and shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. That's the death of the king of the south. He does not exist after that anymore.
That just hit me. That's crazy. It's wild.
If we put that in 1798, it falls apart. History has not followed as verses 41 and on have followed. And so we have to ask, well, what does that mean when, on the one hand, the definition of this term puts it in 1798 and that history does not follow the prophecy. Oh, wait, but the prophet tells us the actual ultimate fulfillment is at some point after 1905 when she's writing this down. And again, if we are parsing this out against current events, it's sometime after 2015, sometime soon after 2015, that it all goes sideways. And if we remember, we're not looking for specifics anymore. Donald Trump may be a manifestation of the King of the North. J.D. Vance may be. I don't know, the Keir Starmer in England may be. It doesn't matter. I'm not looking for individual label anymore. I'm looking for the spirit of the thing. Looks like Jesus, sounds like the devil. Anyone and anything that fits that is the King of the North at the end of time here. If we see everything through that spiritual lens, then the opposite, right? If it's against God, if it's secular, if it's humanist, it is not supernatural at all, that's the King of the South. That's what Ellen White is telling us is happening right now. What's these spirits conflict?
The teepee is full of spiritualism. I can't watch anything. I mean, all of these shows that people follow, avidly follow all of these shows that I just heard the name. It's all about spiritualism.
Yep. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but this is a one world. This is a one world government. That's being talked about in verse 4. That's why I hit, that's the one world government. When the king of the north overwhelms all the isms, that's that one world government that gets established. And then, of course, he gets taken up. But
I'm going to suggest something, and it's going to sound political because I'm referring to actual political events. But let me promise you on the front end, I'm not advocating for the King of the South or the King of the North here, okay? I'm not. But here's what I've seen. When Joe Biden was president, there was an onslaught of secular ideas that I have never received the core in my life.
scared.
Like almost a holy onslaught of everything that was against scripture from, yeah, I mean, yeah, and you lived through it all too.
How the woke, all the woke, and the
And so when somewhere like 2023, when the bottom fell out of that and we were all just kind of like waiting for his presidency to end one way or the other, I was fully expecting a major correction. Not a small correction, a major correction, because that's what Daniel 11 tells me. There would be a massive onslaught from the King of the South, unlike anything we'd seen before. And then the response would be from the King of the North, overwhelming and permanent, right? I don't know if we actually saw that yet. I don't know that Donald Trump's election was that. I don't know that Charlie Kirk's assassination was that. I think both of them have the potential to rally these forces behind them into a larger movement, but I also maybe we're still waiting for that event. I don't know. We can't see some ministry or some Druid is organizing I read the entire Bible out loud over 10 days or something like that event at the end of April. And this is, again, I'm just hearing about it on the radio. That concerns me a lot. Not because, people shouldn't read the Bible, but because it's performative. You're just going to it's not a Bible study. They're just going to say the words as if saying the words is somehow accomplishing something. It looks like Jesus without any substance. That's the King of the North, right? And so really, I want to change our thinking here because I'm looking for Sunday laws just like you, and I'm looking for big authoritarian politicians and ecumenism across the world just like you. But I'm looking at everything. I'm looking at movement to read the Bible out loud without any study or substance. Because that's the King of the North too.
You can't.
So in 22, the specific thing that I mentioned in the sermon is that I had money invested in a crypto scheme, and it was going great. I was earning interest like no one else was earning interest, but I pulled my money out for no reason except that the Sabbath year was ending. And I said, everything goes wrong at the end of the Sabbath year, so I'm just taking my money out just to be sure. And then lo and behold, within 10 days of the Sabbath year ending, the FTX scandal happened and the global economy lost $1.5 trillion overnight. And my money, if it were still in that system, would still be stuck there. I'd still be waiting for it years later. So there's some practical benefits to understanding prophetic timelines.
Hey, there's something wrong with that because we still got him right here. And God is a practical God.
That's right. Hey, he gets to see patterns on purpose. I hadn't appreciated. Listen, you got still lippers.
But let me just finish. I think there is something more on point than just the FTX scandal. And if you look at the politics, which is where prophecy always unfolds on the geopolitical realm, what happened in late 22, early 23, that's when the spirit changed. That's when a lot of Biden's support began to dry up. And for whatever reason, you were there too, so I don't want to put motives in your hearts, but you saw that shift happen. And without that shift, the election of 24 would not have gone the way it did. We would not be in this situation now. So I am perfectly comfortable saying at the end of the Sabbath year is when God shifted the tone. We're now preparing the way for the rise of Babylon. I don't have any more to add into this. I think this is one of those things that when you get the vocabulary of it into your head, you can apply it everywhere. So have fun. I hope that I've empowered you to let this just be the beginning. And before you go, there was actually one more handout. You don't need to go through it, but this is you have versions of this, earlier versions of the same verse by verse breakdown of what we decided it means in history. So this is probably the most complete version. Yeah, no, you did. You have several versions of this. This just has more information in the last time that you did see you. So if you're leaving here with, you think you've got more questions in your mind than answers, and you don't know even what we learned this is a nice 1-page breakdown of what we actually did, the work that we did.
Let's have a closing prayer. Who is going to close our Daniel 11 study with you for us? Loud enough for the camera to hear you.
I will.
Okay, please.
Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, thank you for this Sabbath day. Thank you for this study that Elder Hicks has been able to open us up with, Lord. Thank you for the tools that we have gained. Help us to be able to take these tools and apply them judiciously and not completely crazily. But Lord, I thank you so much for this, for opening up this chapter. It's a mystery chapter for, I think, all of us here. And it's been a blessing to be able to dig in and to nerd out for a little bit. So we thank you for that, Lord. Keep to us now as we finish up the Sabbath, that we start a new week. Please keep us safe and bring us back together next Sabbath. Amen.